the radical, fundamental principles of freedom, rational self-interest, and individual rights. This is the Yaron Brook Show.
All right, everybody. Welcome to Yaron Brook Show on this Monday, January 20th, Inauguration Day. We have a new president. It is official. In the next few days, I'll be taking apart some of the executive orders and talk a little bit about his speech today. We'll do that in the coming shows. But today we've got a real treat. I think we've got Amesh Adalja is back, and he's being joined by Schuur. Both are affiliated with AFCOM, the Association for Free Choice in Medicine. I got it right this time. And Ray is the executive director. Amesh is on the board, chairman of the board.
Chairman
Of the board. And so we'll be talking, we'll be talking about healthcare and kind of the prerequisites. What is it going to require to get Americans to buy into private healthcare? I did a show with the way I would move us towards free market healthcare. And there are obviously lots of options and how you would actually go about getting there and what it actually looks like at the end. I don't think anybody knows. That's the beauty of markets. But how do we actually get Americans to even consider such an idea? I mean, the real problem today is it's not even on the table. So we thought we'd dedicate today's show to that, to the kind of ideological, intellectual work that needs to be done. And to a large extent, I think AFCOM is going to be doing. But maybe let's start, Ray, with just a brief description of what AFCOM is and what your role in it is going to be.
Sure, Ron, and thanks for having us. Just a minor correction. It's Americans for Free Choice.
There you go. I knew I got something wrong. Okay.
But we call it AFCOM for short. So AFCOM was founded in 1993. That's 32 years ago now. It's dedicated to educating Americans so that they can advocate for individual rights and free markets in healthcare. And I took over as the executive director from Richard Ralston last year. And I have a PhD in philosophy, specialized in philosophy of medicine. And we're in many ways rebooting the organization. It was a bit dormant for a few years, but there's a lot of interest in healthcare. It's something I'm very passionate about. And Amesh was already on the board before, and now he's chairperson, and he's also been involved with AFCOM for many years. Amesh, if you want to just share your involvement.
It was probably right around the mid-1990s when not long after I read Atlas Shrugged, I was interested in medicine, and I'd heard about this organization. And this, if you remember, in the 1990s was during the Clinton presidency, and that's when there was a major push for single-payer healthcare, or a major step towards it with Hillary Clinton and the Clinton Care Plan. And AFCOM was very active at that point, with Leonard Peikoff doing town halls, lots of literature being published, a very active executive director at that time, Scott Holler, and they were meeting with congressional staff. And I was just somebody that got a little bit involved at that time, was very interested in it, and I found their policy briefs and their plans very, very interesting. And then, as Ray said, it was kind of less active, although it was still active. And Richard Ralston was getting letters published in the Wall Street Journal regularly. And we had this opportunity when Ray finished his PhD, or was finishing his PhD, was very interested in the philosophy of medicine and free market principles. So we had a couple of meetings, and we kind of reinvigorated and started to get it back active to sort of its former self. And that's, I think, going to be an exciting opportunity, because I think AFCOM is very different, as you'll hear, versus all the other free market think tanks that have their own healthcare plan. And I think hopefully we'll start to gain some traction and start to outline a way forward.
That's great. Yeah, I was a little involved during the Clinton care and then Obamacare, and I know a lot of the founders, so it's really great to see it rebooted, and I'm excited to see what you guys have in store for us in the years. Ray is still young, so in the decades to come, as we fight for more freedom in every realm of American life, but in particular in the realm of healthcare. So one of the big challenges that I find when talking about healthcare, I travel a lot. I spend a lot of time in countries that have socialized healthcare, and they all feel very superior because of that fact. And one of the things I find there, but you also find in the United States, is this idea that, well, America already has free market healthcare. So why do people think that, and what do we do to change that?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really important question. And it's quite remarkable. I mean, you were at the Cambridge Union debating why should we privatize the NHS. And what was interesting about that is that in many ways it was a debate about American healthcare. People kept bringing American healthcare back in here and there. And even when I talk to my relatives, I'm from Europe, I'm from the Netherlands. And when I say I'm moving to America, they say like, "Oh, you'll have to give up your healthcare," right? So there's this astounding amount of misunderstanding. I'm not even sure if it's an issue of a lack of knowledge, and we can get into that, of what even free market in healthcare would be like, and the assumption that America has it.
I think just even some statistics. If you think about the US, the majority of healthcare dollars are taxpayer dollars. It's not private dollars. And if you look at how much the US government spends in terms of taxpayer funds on healthcare, it's higher than any of the countries that have, quote unquote, socialized medicine. So I think that this is this farce that we have a free market here. We have some elements of freedom, but so does the UK, so does Germany. And I think it's just a different mix that we have here. And I think if people, and some of the distortions that we see are not the result of a free market system, but kind of the worst of both worlds that we have here with this mixed system that is inefficient and has all kinds of bureaucracy, all kinds of force put into it. And it gets blamed on free enterprise, but it's not a free enterprise system, and it hasn't been. If you look, the first time the government got involved in healthcare was actually in the John Adams administration. That's when they started paying, started getting involved. So this is something that we've had since the very beginning of our country. We've never really had a free market system.
So why do you think there is this confusion? What is it about our system that is different than the UK and the rest of Europe that makes them so confused? And even Americans, I think generally we have a market system here.
It's because we don't have universal coverage, meaning that not everybody has health insurance, that we've got maybe 20 or 30 million people that don't have health insurance. So that's the difference between many of the other countries where, for example, in Germany, everybody has health insurance, then they have private insurance on top of that, or the same thing in the UK. And I think that's the thing that we don't have. That's the WHO actually ranks healthcare systems based on if there's universal coverage. So it's the universal coverage issue is why it gets labeled as free enterprise, even though that's really not the essential aspect of it.
And I think another important aspect is how people who call themselves advocates for free markets in healthcare sell it and present it. And in many cases, people who call themselves advocates for free healthcare, what they're really advocating for is, well, we want to apply some free market principles to this government program, or and not at all question like, why is insurance playing the kind of role that it's playing, right? Like, is this a phenomenon of the free market, or is this no one questions that. It's a question of, well, don't you like transparency, or like, don't you like competition? Let's add a little bit of those ingredients to the system we have. There's no real kind of thinking like, what kind of system do we even have where like no one knows prices? It's definitely not like any other industry where you would go and buy and get certain services.
But
So
to what extent it seems that this is, I mean, it's a broader problem, right? People don't know what capitalism is. They don't know what free markets are, period. They think America is capitalist. I mean, if you particularly Europeans think America is capitalist, is the epitome of capitalism, not just I go and say we don't have capitalism in the world, and they look at me like I'm crazy. Of course you do. America's capitalist. And this seems to like one instance, but a particularly bad one where they just can't conceptualize what free markets are, and they can't concretize it. They can't think in terms of what that looks like.
Yeah, but I think there's something more specific here because I find that when I meet Americans or Europeans, and they say like, "Oh, Ray, you're moving to America. Isn't that like privatized healthcare, blah, blah, blah." I find that kind of going through with them, like all the ways that it's not a free market, doesn't convince them.
No.
In a way that's different for other industries. So I think they think there's something different about healthcare. And so I don't think it's an issue of them not knowing the facts. I think it's more an issue of there appears to be a kind of a cognitive bias towards assuming that, well, you want complete freedom in healthcare? Really? There's a kind of assumption like, no, like you need controls here. So whenever I hear someone say like, oh, American healthcare is privatized or free market, and I bring up all these counterexamples, what they're really saying is that, well, they're saying one of two things. They're either saying, okay, there's a little bit too many controls here, and like we need to loosen it up, or they think it's not enough controls, right? So it's just the assumption that healthcare is different, and should be different for moral reasons, and we'll get into that as well. But so definitely, I mean, we're talking about the kind of prerequisites that we would need for Americans to want a free market in healthcare. One of those prerequisites is they would actually have to know what a free market in healthcare is, and they don't. The problem is that even if they do, it's a question of whether they would accept it. And we can get to that next.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. And put aside foreigners who might not know and don't really get it. How well do you think Americans understand what's going on in healthcare? I mean, they know sometimes the insurance company doesn't cover them. They know they're frustrated, but like this idea the government spends more than 50% of all the dollars spent on healthcare and things like that. To what extent do you think that is something that Americans are really, an extent to which it's all regulated, are aware of?
I don't think that they actually have a good grasp of that. I think they know that there's programs like Medicare and Medicaid and the VA and the military healthcare system. They know that there's those things, but I don't think they've ever added it up or totaled it. And I think they don't recognize how much of even, what quote unquote is private medicine is still government controlled medicine in terms of the licensure of doctors, licensures of hospitals, the licensures of number of beds in a hospital, the way what insurance products are offered, what insurance has to cover, what insurance can charge, how much of an insurance company's profits have to be reinvested in the insurance plan or used on benefits rather than for dividends or whatever it may be. All of that, I don't think they quite understand that it's completely, you always talk, Yaron, about the finance industry being one of the most controlled industries. I think the healthcare industry probably is second, if not almost the same as the finance in terms of if you add up, all of the state licensing, the federal, all the federal programs, Medicare, Medicaid, the VA, all of that put together. I think it's really a government managed system that we have here that has some elements of privatization in it, but not very many. And all those private things are by permission. They're they're very throttled.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the very fact that everybody who works in healthcare has to be licensed, which is not necessarily true in finance, is one big difference and one that makes the industry even more regulated.
So I mean, it's a case like Amesh says that people don't understand, and to the extent that they try to make sense of it, what I see more often is that it's the language of the markets that they think best explains what's wrong with it. It's the profit motive. It's elements of capitalism, right? So like if they have an understanding, it's that understanding, and which is false.
Yeah, I mean,
they don't also realize all the force creates everybody at each other's throats. That every that doctors versus hospital administrators versus insurance companies versus they're all against each other because there's so much force there, and that creates all these conflicts of interest that are irreconcilable under the current system. And that's all these things that you hear, all of these horror stories about health insurance companies denying stuff, that comes from they're all a function of this system that's been created, that's this mongrel mix. And it often gets blamed on the profit motive, but they don't understand that the system already sets people up against each other. And that's what's causing all of these issues.
So can you give an example of that, Amish? I mean, where it, because
Yeah,
it's kind of a zero-sum game that the regulators set it up, right?
Yeah, so let's think. So an insurance company denies a claim. They deny a claim because if they paid out the claim, maybe it will cost a lot of money, and then they're going to have to increase premiums. But they have certain price caps on what a premium can be charged. So they're even within their business model, they've got competing interests to say if we accept all these claims and we don't really scrutinize them, premiums are going to go up, and then we're going to get faulted for having too high of premiums. So the whole system is rigged to fail almost.
Yeah, absolutely. So, do you think if people understood, we don't have a free market, would Americans want a free market? I mean, is that the direction they would want to head? I mean, I remember the days where the polls showed that most Americans didn't like Obamacare, and my sense was they didn't like Obamacare because it didn't socialize the system enough, not because they wanted more free market healthcare. But do you have a sense that the direction would be, if they understood the role of government, would be towards more freedom in healthcare?
I would say that the thing that they don't like about Obamacare is it's called the Obama. That's what they don't like about it, because they liked it when it was Romney Care. They like and that's why there's nothing, they can't repeal and replace it, because most of our policymakers actually agree with most of the principles of Obamacare. They just don't like that it's called Obamacare. If it was called Trump Care, I suspect they would all support it. But I don't necessarily think that everybody wants. They don't understand what a free market is, and I don't think that they would be prepared to accept things. So if you said that some billionaire could get a kidney transplant faster because he paid the donor, they wouldn't accept that. They would find that morally repugnant. And I use this analogy. You talk about price gouging when there's like a hurricane. For water, healthcare is like that 365/7, 24/7. So if they don't, just like they don't like someone having to pay $20 for a bottle of water during a hurricane, they're not going to like it if some rich person can get a kidney transplant and pay a donor. It's illegal to actually pay for that, pay a donor in the United States. So I think that they probably would find most of this morally repugnant, because this idea of altruism, or that need is what matters here, rather than ability to pay, or a free transaction, a free market transaction between two voluntary parties. That's not something that's even in their mind, because they treat healthcare very differently. They treat it like an emergency situation all the time, and that's where you never see free market principles during an emergency situation, as we saw during COVID.
Yeah, and I think it's worse than that. It's not only that people view healthcare as like an ongoing hurricane, because it's one thing to like blame the water bottle company for price gouging and like being selfish and whatnot. But these are doctors, and the expectation is that, well, aren't doctors supposed to like sacrifice? And you see this in the history of medicine, is that there's something off when people think of the mixture of medicine and business, because business is about self-interest, and medicine has this ethos of the doctor slaving away for their patients. Now, of course, doctors work very hard, and that's part of what it means to be in medicine. But fundamentally, the value creation there is a trade.
So, in what way did it manifest itself in history? Were doctors more viewed as businesses once?
Well, I mean, the thing is that they sometimes like to pretend that they present themselves like, oh, the solo practitioner who can hang up their shingle and like have their black bag, but the AMA had like a ban on doctors making a profit off of other doctors' labor, right?
So you couldn't employ them.
Um, they they couldn't make a profit off of another doctor's labor. Yeah, so like there were kind of barriers towards the corporate practice of medicine and those kinds of things. There were other kinds of bans, like bans on doctors like holding patents on drugs. And the view is that like, well, that's too much like business. That's too commercial. And there were like these old AMA reports from like the 1910s raving about the commercialism in medicine and that that's evil.
So many people, and both my parents are physicians, so I've been around this for a very long time. I think that there's this idea that doctors should be above all of that, about petty concerns about money. And the AMA and other organizations thought of medicine as a guild, and they would protect that guild to make sure that you got adequate, what they call, not, they don't call it, a salary. They say reimbursement for your time. They use the word reimbursement because they don't want to say profit. So doctors do get paid well, but it was something that they wanted to think they thought of as dirty, or I can remember my mom saying was blood money, that when you saw a doctor get very wealthy. So I think that there was this issue that doctors were going to get paid well somehow. Somebody would take care of them, whether that's a hospital, whether that's an insurance company or the government. But that's not something that they wanted to talk about with patients. That's not something they wanted to be flashy about. And flashy doctors were often kind of derided. But I think that there was, obviously there were elements of business that happened when you were a solo practitioner, that you have an office and office staff and you have to do all of that kind of stuff. But you never really want, I think it was very difficult for doctors to deal with patients that had unpaid bills. They often would forgive it, or I can remember my dad getting paid in food or getting paid with candy or whatever. One time, my mom got paid in marijuana, which she had before it was legal. So it was not something that they wanted to touch. And I think that's also because, and that probably goes back all the way to Hippocrates, where maybe it's not explicitly talked about with ability to pay, but I mean, there's that understanding that doctors are kind of society's resource and not something that's kind of part of the commercial system.
Yeah, which is not to say that there can't be a place for that in the same way that a lawyer does things pro bono, but to actually have value creation, you have to have people thinking about medicine as a value that they can create and trade. Because if you don't have that, then you have nothing to be charitable about. That's where the value comes from.
Do you think that has changed at all over the years? I mean, you're seeing more and more doctors get MBAs, for example, and view their practices as businesses, or is that mostly because of the increased bureaucracy that doctors have to deal with these days?
So I would say, so first of all, most doctors don't have their own practices. Most doctors, the majority of doctors in the United States, are employed by a hospital system. So they often get MBAs, at least my friends. My mother got it, and my mother has an MBA too. Was not because they were trying to run their business better. It's because they were trying to become more hospital administrators, to get more involved on that side of it with the insurance companies, with hospital management. That's what they get interested in, because they increasingly get kind of tired and burned out of the day in, day out seeing patients, that sometimes they get an MBA to rise in the corporate hierarchy, because they're often, a doctor at a big medical center will be kind of just a worker drone. They don't have that kind of professional respect that they once had. They're thought of as employees, and they're fungible. They can be removed. They can replace them with another doctor very quickly. So one way that doctors gain job security in these big health systems is to get an MBA. So now they become an administrator, and that's, I think, the big trend towards getting MBAs within medicine, not so much to run practice. And I would say most doctors that are employed by healthcare systems look down on doctors that are in private practice. They look down on them if they're solo practice, that they're kind of not in academic medicine anymore. They're just kind of doing this and not really part of the mainstream of medicine anymore. If you kind of thought of as selling out if you have a solo practice, even though you might make less, it's just that you're like taking yourself out of that kind of the rat race that everybody's involved in now in medicine.
Yeah, although there is a small and growing movement of people who just want to drop out of that whole system, and they don't take insurance, and they have their own concierge practice and other kinds of direct primary care and whatnot. And what's interesting is that I mean, their pieces, for example, in the New York Times, like with series on the evil profit motive in these big systems, and then they go to these smaller businesses, and they actually present them as like, well, these people actually care about their patients, but they don't make the connection there with the profit motive. They just think that, oh, well, they just escaped the corporate profit motive, and now they have their small business, so that's fine.
Yeah, so there is this burgeoning direct primary care and concierge doctors, but it's very restricted and very limited. Not every specialty can do it. You have to have a specialty that's like family medicine or primary care or something where you don't need to be around hospitals or use hospitals, because as soon as you start taking Medicare, which you have to do if you're in a hospital situation, if you're a doctor that's based in a hospital, you cannot be part of any of that concierge world.
So the concierge world does not take Medicare patients?
No, not only does it not take them, you can't have a concierge practice on the side and then also be a regular hospital doctor, which is that's more restricted. So in England, you can be an NHS doctor and have a fancy practice on Harley Street and they don't mind. In the United States, if you do not take Medicare, you can't dabble in both systems. You can't be a concierge and take Medicare. They make it very, very difficult. That's one policy fix that would be great, but I think it's very difficult to do.
So I hit Medicare soon. It means I have no access to the concierge, that world.
Well, you have to pay cash, but your doctor also couldn't be a doctor to a Medicare patient. Like you can't charge different price. You can't have that. So suppose it doesn't really matter so much if you're a primary care doctor, because you don't need to be in the hospital. But for someone like me, or you couldn't find like a surgeon that's a concierge surgeon other than a plastic or a bariatric surgeon. You're not going to find a surgeon that can do an appendectomy, take a patient from the ER and do an appendectomy, and then also do bariatric surgery for cash. They won't allow that because it's not.
Well, although of course, in an ideal system, you'd think that a general practitioner would want to be able to go to the hospital, right? I'd like him to be with me no matter what is going on. So that would be ideal.
Yeah, that's a different trend of like now we have what are called hospital medicine doctors or hospitalists. They usually do all the hospital care, and most primary care doctors don't go to the hospital anymore.
Wow. All right. So
Yeah. So,
go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, so we've covered two things now. Like one thing that you would need for Americans to want free markets in healthcare, they would need to know what they are. But that's not enough, because they might know it and they might not want it. And I need to want it, but not just because it works or some free market think tank says like, oh, well, you'll like it. You'll have like more affordable care. They have to want it morally, right? So they have to think that a free market in healthcare can be moral. And I think there the barrier is that people just view healthcare as something different, right? And I think that for that reason, there's a special challenge in healthcare in arguing for free markets. And then the question is, what is the view that they have of healthcare such that they think it can't be subject to a free market? And I don't mean here is simply the arguments that economists make that, oh, there's a what's it called, asymmetry of information, all these technical things. There's something deeper here about how people think that healthcare is different.
What's the deeper thing?
I mean, it's the view that once healthcare exists, it's like the air, right? And like, what, you're not going to like charge me for air, are you? And it's a view that Amesh in his talk on the history of government in American healthcare is described as the kind of Garden of Eden view or manna from heaven view. And you see this in all sorts of ways, that once a particular drug becomes available or a certain standard is created within the healthcare system, that, well, you need it, and therefore it's like the water and the air. Amish, do you have a...
Yeah, so as a non-philosopher, I think I'm going to try and delve into philosophy a little bit. I think that most people have accepted John Rawls's ideas, even whether they don't know his name or not, that they think of a world from that, that point, that veil of ignorance, where they don't know if they're going to be rich, they don't know if they're going to be healthy, and they think, what kind of a society do I want to live in? And most of them will want a society where no matter their ability to pay, no matter how sick they are, no matter what pre-existing condition they may have, that they have the ability to get the best healthcare or the healthcare that would fix that problem. That's how they think of it. Just like they think, so they do think of it like air or water now, that it's not something that can be subject to market forces. They've got to create a society where everybody gets that healthcare irrespective of their ability to pay and irrespective of the condition that they might be in and their choices. That's what their ideal is. And I think that's why they see it differently, is because this is completely ingrained into it, this veil of ignorance and trying to set up a society where the least off are no worse off. And they think that in a free enterprise system, the worst off are going to be worse. The ones that are the most needy are going to be worse off. And that's why they reject it.
Yeah. And the other area where you see this view is really at the time when modern medicine was coming to age in the 19th century. There was this view called also the Republic of Science view, which sounds like a great name, but it's not a great idea. And it's the idea that medical knowledge is kind of like a public good, and that, sure, individuals contribute to it, but no one owns it, right? And if that's the case, and you kind of like downplay the role of bringing that knowledge into practice, well, then having businesses take that kind of knowledge and create drugs from it looks wrong, right? It's like, why are you doing that? We have this a pool of medical knowledge for the benefit of humanity, and you're putting a patent on it and profiting off of it? How dare you? Right? But which of course is based on a false view, because yes, medical science and science in general is a cooperative enterprise. But that enterprise is only as good as the independent thinking of each individual involved, right? And there is real individual value creation there, which is why patents are appropriate, but also one of the reasons why patents were rejected within the medical community, because it was viewed that, well, you're essentially stealing this public good. And there's an undermining also of the role that businesses actually played in the history of medicine in bringing drugs to market. And they're saying like, oh, it was just publicly funded, or even before it was publicly funded, they would say it was this kind of commons.
So why do you think this doesn't exist, let's say, in food? There's no big movement to nationalize the food supply and nationalize food production, but it definitely is in healthcare. I mean, there's it's much more socialism, if you will, egalitarianism, as Amesh described it, in healthcare than there is in pretty much any other activity in the U.S. today.
I think there probably is a little bit of that in food, with food stamps and food banks and government doing that. And there's definitely that when it comes to like heating oil. I'm talking to you from Pittsburgh where it's 10 degrees, but that there's always this issue about heating oil, and there's all these programs to make sure that people have heating oil. So I think it's there. I think medicine is just so stark because it is life or death, and it's now. It's not something, it needs to, many medical problems have to be taken care of within days, hours, even minutes. So that I think the urgency of that is what brings it to the fore with medicine, in a way that you don't have time for another solution that you might have with food. But I think medicine kind of is a hyper acute focus on that problem, that where altruism kind of directs people to come up with their own, so this socialized solution, this universal solution versus free enterprise.
And I think it also has to do with how doctors and people involved in medical innovation and the development of medical knowledge think of themselves, as opposed to farmers or people like that. And if they think of themselves as you said earlier, Amish, as we're kind of above all that, well, then the people that they interact with, the rest of society, is going to hold them to that kind of standard, right? It's like, well, yeah, you think that working with business is kind of beneath you, then the expectation is like, well, let's create the knowledge and we expect new drugs and new treatments.
Do you think people have an understanding of the extent to which healthcare is produced, requires the same kind of engagement activity as tech companies, as any other good that they are, actually more so than any of the good that they are consuming out there?
I think they recognize that healthcare workers do a lot. I think that became very clear during COVID, when people were on their roofs clapping for the healthcare workers. They know that you go through especially for a physician, you go through medical school and grueling residency and long hours, and you're basically committed to this for life, and you're constantly learning. So I think they recognize all of that, and they recognize the long days and never not being able to answer, to put your phone on do not disturb. They know all of that, but I don't think they think of it as a product of the mind. I mean, they don't. It's not as explicit to them as to borrow one of your things, like Steve Jobs creating an iPhone. It's not something that they think of like that. They don't understand it's as a product of a mind, that it is actually a product that's being produced by an individual who's, whether that's a doctor, a nurse, a dentist, whoever it may be, or a hospital, or even a health insurance company. I don't think they get that aspect of it. They know that there's people there that worked hard to get to those positions, but I don't think it's as concrete to them as someone that makes an iPhone.
Yeah, and I think the dominant factor there is that to the extent that they think it involves minds, it's a collective mind, right? And if it is a collective mind, then then you have to question the kind of place for business, right? Which is about pursuing profits and taking something, quote unquote, taking something from what people regard as this kind of public domain and profiting off of it, right? And that is viewed differently, and that's a problem because it is an individual achievement. I mean, like if you think of Amesh, who's the lady who came up with the mRNA vaccine, Caitlin Kurikoff.
Caitlin Carrico, yeah, her
Yeah.
picture's right over there on the wall behind her.
Her story is just amazing, right?
Yeah.
Like she battled it out against like all these other people who didn't believe in her. I mean, you cannot tell me that what she achieves was a personal individual achievement. Yes, it required work with other people. And I think in those cases, people might appreciate the individual initiative and judgment involved, right? And trading with other people who are doing the same. But then there's a kind of like a pause. It's like, oh, but that doesn't fit in with how I think about the rest of science and medical science and my ideal view that, well, yeah, we don't want private businesses to develop these drugs. We ideally would want someone else to do that, someone who doesn't have a profit motive.
Yep. Does it give them any pause, the fact that an overwhelming majority of medical innovation happens in the United States because it's still there's still some elements of freedom, and there is a profit motive, at least driving pharma and biotech and some of these entities?
I think most of them evade that aspect of it. That's why, and even the people here evade that aspect.
Yep.
The policymakers who know better evade it. That's why when they do Medicare, quote, price negotiation, which is not really a negotiation, when they do that, they don't realize that prices are higher in the United States because that's subsidizing all of the research that the rest of the world, which does have price controls. So I don't think they understand. I think they know that the innovation is occurring in the United States, that almost all the cutting edge stuff happens here, but I don't think that they recognize that it's because of people's ability to profit from it that is what's driving that.
Mm-hmm.
I think that maybe they understand that a little bit with the pharmaceutical industry, but I think it's very limited, and they don't understand the consequences of when they make it inhospitable to that type of innovation. That investment money is not going to go to pharmaceutical companies if pharmaceutical companies can't give people a good return.
And I think from the European side, why it might not give them pause is because what's more important in their minds is not the newest thing, but does everyone have the same? Right? And if that's your primary concern, you're going to be less concerned about something new, right? Because by definition, something new is going to be limited. And so that's not going to be your top of mind if your primary concern is like, well, we just want everyone to have the same.
There are people now that even openly advocate if some new treatment, even if it's breakthrough and curative, if it's cost too much and not everybody can have it, we shouldn't even develop it. So that's also something, this kind of trial balloon has kind of gone up about this idea that if you make some drug that cures Alzheimer's disease and it costs too much and not everybody's going to have it, then just it shouldn't be something that you even worry about.
Right. So it's pretty bleak. The state of healthcare is bleak, particularly when I think we know what alternatives could be and how good it could be. But people's attitudes is even bleaker than the state of the field is. How do we change this? How do you make a dent in what's going on right now?
I mean, I think what you would have to do, I mean, the bottom line is that we live in a time that's actually pretty exciting for medical innovation and even with regards to the delivery of healthcare. There are people coming up with new ideas. Like they might not always work, but there's a lot of reasons to be excited about medicine. And what you would want to do then is then appeal to the best of people, um, in terms of people who actually want to create new things and instill with them that healthcare is a product of the mind that is worth fighting for, and that it's not only worth fighting for the doctor or the insurer or the people working in big pharma, but for everyone, which is uh, not a perspective that you tend to have. You tend to have people throwing each other under the bus, like, oh, it's their fault, it's their fault. You need a recognition that what you're creating is valuable and it requires freedom, but not just for you, but for everyone else. And that's a long-term goal, but I think that's doable, especially given that people are so excited about healthcare. And if they sense that whatever they're working on is under threat, that's where we can come in and be like, no, like this is worth defending, and we're going to give you the intellectual ammunition to do that.
And I think emphasizing that medicine is a product of the mind, and the mind needs to be free in order to be able to flourish. And if you want the best healthcare, if you want the best medicine, you've got to make sure that those minds are free and not subject to force from all against all, a war against all against all, basically, is what's going on in healthcare. I think you've got to get people to really understand that at a concrete level, and then they see what the possibilities could be. And then I think that's how you introduce them to what a free market looks like, that all these caricatures are wrong, that we don't have a free market, and what they worry about is not necessarily going to be some major disqualifying problem.
Yeah. So do you guys think that what Alex has done in the field of energy can be done here, Alex Epstein can be done here in healthcare? To what extent do you think, objectivism has to win in the culture for there to be fundamental changes in healthcare?
I think Alex is a good. I think Alex is a good example of how this could work. I think that you could almost just transpose a lot of his talking points to healthcare, because, and I think it would work. And I think his ability to do it in a way that's non-confrontational, that actually gets people to be really honest about what they're worried about and talk about their concerns and show the right way, I think would work. And I don't necessarily think objectivism has to win in the culture to get this. I think once you start to get it actually a real element of free enterprise, I think people will start to see the difference. I mean, Canadians, even if they like to not say that they see the difference, they do see the difference, because go look at that hospital in Niagara Falls, New York. How many Canadians go there, and how many people live have U.S. insurance that live in Canada, just in case. But so I think that's one way to think about it, is what Alex did. I think it would be, great if Ray could be the Alex for healthcare. That's one of the hopes with, Ray being the executive director and all of the work ARI is doing to help with this.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Alex is definitely an inspiration for me, and there's a lot to learn there. But there's also differences in healthcare. I mean, what Alex has shown to people through his work is that environmentalism is essentially based on an anti-human disposition attitude, right? And people recognize that that's wrong, but it's harder to show that something like egalitarianism is wrong. It's still wrong. Like you could still end up showing that it's monstrous, but it requires more work. It's more ingrained. And more importantly, again, there's this certain ethical ethos around medicine that makes it harder to make a moral case for free markets in it. So what you would really need, like really, even before you convince everyday Americans, is that you would have to convince doctors to rethink their own image. And not just doctors, other producers in healthcare, people working in the pharmaceutical industry, pharmacists, scientists, nurses, rethink their own moral self-image in a way that's very counterintuitive to most people. But it can be done, and there are many people who do view themselves in medicine as doing business, and that's good, that's just. And I see no reason why we can't accomplish that long term.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely one difference is that the people within the energy industry generally support the profit motive and are generally pro-business and always have been. So Alex started with a base of support from within the industry that maybe doesn't quite exist in healthcare. Although, maybe you can start with the businesses, those new doctors, and maybe with some of the biotech, medical devices, pharma, that are already based on the profit motive. That is a good beginning.
Yeah,
And I definitely have tried to do that with pharma. Anytime I get interviewed and asked about COVID vaccines or the patents or whatever it might be, I've been trying to do like mini Alex types of, getting across kind of mini Alex type of points to the press when I'm talking about, who actually turns a vaccine into a vaccination that gets in someone's arms. It's the pharmaceutical companies, and especially when we have an incoming potential health secretary that's really against all these pharmaceutical companies. I think it's really important to defend pharmaceutical companies as being, they saved the world when it came to COVID.
Absolutely.
and that is definitely the way that I see the role for AFCOM is for different people in the healthcare industry, providing intellectual ammunition, ways to defend themselves against unjust attacks, and to defend the work that they do in not just practical terms, but moral terms. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the challenge seems to be these days twofold in medicine. Not only do you have the moral obstacles, but then you have, the whole crazy anti-science segment of the American public that is turning against vaccines and against healthcare, and ivermectin will cure cancer, according to the prominent scientist Mel Gibson. You've got more quackery. Although I guess you have the same thing with climate science.
I mean, I think that is closer to the phenomenon that Alex is dealing with. I mean, there's a kind of environmentalist aspect to that untouched nature, like untouched human um, bodies are healthier than vaccinated ones.
Yeah, I will say an untouched human body is going to live about 20 years.
Yes, that's right.
Yes, and last I looked, ivermectin was not untouched by humans. Even ivermectin is a drug that was developed.
Made by Merck Pharmaceuticals.
Yeah, by Merck. So, it's just for whatever bizarre, crazy reason, it has become the cure-all for a certain segment of the population. It is truly bizarre. All right. Yeah, go ahead.
I mean, but it does show the kind of integration of knowledge that we need. Like, we don't just need people saying that, well, pharmaceutical companies aren't evil. We need people with that perspective, pushing back against this kind of ignorance, but also a real need for knowledge. Like, people are wondering what things in the environment are potentially harmful for me. Like, what things should I eat, which is a real value. And so we really need a strong integration of philosophical knowledge and expertise across all these disciplines.
How do you deal with the fact that so many people today attribute the success in medicine to government? So it's government funds, it's NIH grants, pharma is in bed with government. They could really do what they do without, the cronyism. How do we separate out what are real achievements of kind of the whatever is private and what are what people attribute to government?
I think it's very difficult because the system is completely integrated now. The NIH works hand in glove with pharmaceutical companies. The NIH worked on the COVID vaccine, handed off that formula to Moderna. There are real, genuine scientists that work at NIH, and the government has basically crowded out a lot of the basic science research budget for decades now. So right now, it is very difficult to separate it, but there clearly are demarcations where you can see who does the work, and they go. And sometimes there are fights over patents. There just was one between NIH and Moderna. But I think you have to realize that we live in a system where government is involved in all aspects of biomedical research, as well as the delivery of healthcare. So it's impossible to completely untangle them. And there are genuine scientists that work at the NIH, that work at CDC, that work at FDA, that are part of that team. But I think what you have to realize is that there's still a commercial aspect. There's building it in scale. It's turning an idea into a product. And I think there's where that's where you can kind of separate some of that. And also there are genuine discoveries that happen at pharmaceutical companies, but it's kind of what's unseen. You don't know what it would be like if there weren't if NIH wasn't the major funder of basic science research. We don't know how many other philanthropies would do this. Remember, the polio vaccine was funded by a private charity, the March of Dimes. It wasn't funded by government. So there are examples of non-governmental funding doing that. And the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is another great example of the innovations that they're doing with genetically modified mosquitoes and all kinds of cool stuff.
Yeah, if only they were allowed to actually get those out. I'd love to see the death of mosquitoes. Ray?
And I mean, and there are also people who are frustrated with like how the NIH funds particular kinds of research, and they're trying to come up with new models for funding, right? So there's like a base there that you can show that you can also have basic science work being funded outside of government. But like Amesh said, it's very difficult because it's crowded out, and if the brightest minds see their mentors working at the NIH or these, and it's kind of seen as the highest kind of funding that you can get is an NIH grant. Like if you're at even at a private university, then that's what people are going to do. But like you mentioned in the previous show, Yaron, the problem with that is that very often it's these older people that are getting it. And if people see that as like a symptom of a wider problem, well, they're probably not going to say like, oh, we have to defund it, NIH or privatize it or whatever, but they might at least be open to reforms, which is the first step.
Yeah, there seems to be a growing movement to try to reform at least the NIH to make science funding more effective. We'll see how far that goes, but there seems to be at least voices talking about it who are many of them from economics. So what do you guys expect in the next few years that AFCOM is going to be doing concretely to make some of these changes?
I mean, changes are definitely long-term. Like if by changes you mean policies. And importantly, we are an educational organization, so we don't directly advocate for policy changes. We also can't endorse candidates, any of that stuff. We educate people about policies so they can support them and advocate for them themselves. But I think before you would do that, and we will continue to do that, and you would really want to connect with particular communities within the healthcare system and speak to their concerns. And again, like I said, to the best aspects of them, to the aspects that recognizes that the work that they're doing is important. And then that creates an opening that if that work is being threatened in some way by government regulations or controls, you can say, well, the reason why it's being threatened is because you're under force and you need freedom. And you would want to build a kind of a relationship with those communities, not unlike Alex has done with the fossil fuel industry, that you're their ally, you're an intellectual advocate for them. And then you would want to start doing that across communities in order to build a broad coalition or alliance.
And I think a couple of concrete things we want to happen is we want Ray to start being involved in policy discussions, going to Washington and being in part of panel discussions and that other think tanks might be having, writing, speaking about this. He's also convening a lot of doctors that are kind of in the objectivist ARI orbit that we've been collecting their names, and we have this call every couple of weeks called the Thomas Hendricks Working Group, named after Thomas Hendricks, the physician in Atlas Shrugged. So we've been doing that kind of stuff. It's kind of slow going now because we're trying to just get everything up and running. But I think what I want AFCAM to do is be part of the policy discussion that's going on and be a real player. And people say, what's AFCAM's view on this position? That's where I think we would make some headway, even if we don't see a specific policy change, but being able to talk to and influence people that are thinking about these policies and putting them in the right moral framework, not just as, quick fixes that are going to be undone by the next administration, or, just tinkering with, the healthcare savings account contribution amount goes up by $500. And, that's not, we're not trying to do that.
So if there's a doctor out there listening to the show who would like to participate in some of these calls and be involved in what you guys are trying to do, how do they get in touch with you? What can they do?
In the show description, there's a link to www.afcam.org, and there is my email under people. You can also just tell them what my email is. It's rschur@afcm.org.
And importantly, it's not just doctors. There's dentists, physical therapists, optometrists, psychologists, anybody in any of the allied health field, nurses, anybody that's interested in this. We want to be part of this. It's not something exclusively to physicians. It's really anybody in the whole ecosystem of healthcare, pharmaceuticals, biotech, pharma, all of that. That's kind of what we want to try to attract, the people that are interested in these ideas and want to learn more or want to participate in some of our stuff.
So the best thing then is to send Ray an email expressing that interest. Great. I also got Wes is here. Wes, thank you for the support. Really appreciate it. He says, I got here late. I appreciate your efforts. How can any of us contribute to help? So is there a way to contribute online, or again, should they contact you, Ray?
You can go to our website where we have a donation page. And if you want to make a recurring donation, you can send me an email.
So AFCM.org?
That's right.
AFCM.org is basically the website. You can check it out and then drop Ray an email, particularly if you're in the health fields, any of the health fields. If you're in biotech, I know a number of my listeners are in biotech, or if you're a scientist, or if you're a doctor, nurse, or anybody related in these fields, this is the time to get involved. And
Ray and I will both be in Florida at the conference in Fort Myers coming up.
Okay, that's right. And the conference in Naples, what is it, next week, late next week, is happening, and Amesh and Ray are going to be there. So they're escaping the cold of the Northeast. You guys should escape the cold from the Northeast and come down to Naples, Florida, and hang out with us over Ayn Rand's birthday. It should be a lot of fun. All right, let's see. We've got a few questions here. Let's see. Jennifer asks, why do you think so many non-medical people think they know about medicine when they don't? I don't usually hear non-engineers thinking they know all about bridge construction.
I think it's probably because people have some experience with their own health. They've doctored themselves. They've learned some things, basic first aid, and they kind of extrapolate that, especially when they've got resources like the internet where they can look things up and get some expert opinion. So I think it's because this is something they directly have experience with. It's not like they're building a bridge every day, but they're dealing with their aches and pains and sniffles every day. So I think that's that familiarity plus resources that are available on the internet.
Do you think it's also the fact that there's disagreement in the field? Like, there's not a lot of disagreement publicly, at least, about a bridge, about how construct a bridge and what goes into it. But on healthcare, it seems like there's contradictory information almost every day that is made public. So the experts don't agree, put it that way.
Yeah, I think there definitely are certain areas where there is controversy, where there could be two groups of really two groups of subject matter experts that completely disagree on something, like, for example, Alzheimer's disease. What causes Alzheimer's? There's lots of that. So that also there's not certainty the way there is, like you said, with the principles of engineering to build a bridge. So that also opens up that idea that nobody knows. Nobody's an expert. They don't know. And there are places where it's really bad in medicine, like nutrition, where I think that you can't ever figure up or down in nutrition. But I think that that's what leads to it.
And yet we've got plenty of religionists when it comes to nutrition. Nutrition is an open field for these people who know the truth, and there's no question about what that truth is, in spite of the ambiguity of the science. Yes, it is a unique field, and I think you're right. It's our familiarity with our own bodies and our own challenges that makes it that we think from an N of one we can extrapolate to what is true and what is not. And
think about the
one is dubious, right?
You think about like the old man who says it's going to rain because I can feel it in my knee. I mean, that's been going on forever, where people have these ideas about their health. And
yep. Marilyn asks, are there ways for better, more experienced doctors to get paid more? Many seem to think doctors are interchangeable, but they're not. It's hard to get information about which doctors are better. And then she says, P.S. Medicare sucks.
I think it's really, really hard for doctors to get paid more because it's the same fee schedule. So if you do an appendectomy, you're going to get it you're going to get paid whatever it is based on your given area that you live in, that the insurance company says this is what healthcare costs here. So no, you don't really have the ability to get paid more unless you're doing something on the side, like a plastic surgeon or somebody that's doing something outside of the insurance industry. Or you go to your hospital if you're employed by a hospital and say, I'm the best at such and such a thing. I want to be paid more. They may pay you more that way, but the insurance company is not really going to pay. They may pay you, give you a little bonus for quality or less errors, that kind of thing, but it's not going to be, it's very hard to really get a different salary based on that in the US system. It's interesting, in US doctors, everybody thinks they're paid the highest. It's actually Switzerland doctors are paid higher on average than in the United States. And Canada is not very far behind US doctors in terms of pay, even though those are socialized systems.
So is the only way for an American doctor to make more money is to increase volume?
Yes, it's basically to increase volume or, I guess increase volume or do something outside the system that they're allowed to do. Sometimes they'll pay for quality, like an insurance company will give you a bonus if you've had, less post-op infections or whatever, or if you got all your diabetic patients are under, they'll look at the whole panel and say, oh, this guy's got all his patients under really well control. We'll give you a little bit of more, but that's kind of like an add-on bonus, not really, you're not charging anybody more.
Do you think in a free market, what do you think the model would evolve to in a free market? Because it seems like this model and the way doctors are paid is insane today.
I think it would probably move. I think you'd probably have lots of different ways. There might be things that look very similar to what we have today, where people have insurance and they have a doctor and that doctor is employed by a hospital system. But I think what you would see is a lot more people outside the system, a lot more cash business or people prepaying subscription type of models where they're able to avoid all those insurance, more people with catastrophic health insurance rather than insurance that's kind of, that covers everything. All of those types of models would probably be different. I think, it would be interesting to look at, for example, pet insurance. That's becoming a big thing now, where they have a free market. Veterinarians make more than doctors than medical doctors. But the pet insurance is an area where you might see the innovation there. And I know people would probably cringe at trying to make that kind of comparison. But I think that's where you're going to probably see innovative models in places where they're able to do it.
Yeah, and what's interesting is that if you look at the history of healthcare, insurance models initially didn't want to get involved at all. And it was really because the AMA went after physician group practices that the insurance model was the only game left in town. And at that point, there was federal legislation being pushed. This was during the 1930s. And then the idea was, well, now we have to work with insurance companies because otherwise we're going to have a national health insurance model. And if you look at the history, like it gives you a sense of how different things could have been if that original burgeoning of different models for financing healthcare was allowed to actually continue.
Yeah.
Initially, insurance was just going to be for hospitals. Hospitals would charge insurance companies for the stay, and the doctors were just going to be paid cash by the patient. And then it became kind of something where they got captured by the whole insurance industry. That whole thing happened as a way to stave off complete nationalization.
What are your thoughts on like Peter Attia's views on healthcare 3.0? That is the next evolution kind of in healthcare.
I like Peter Attia. I did his podcast early on in COVID. I think it was one of the better interviews I did. Not excluding my interviews with you, but I think he's onto some very interesting ideas. I think that increasingly this preventative medicine, thinking about longevity and the health span versus lifespan, is taking over the way that people are thinking about this. I think what we need is a lot more innovation and understanding aging and understanding what things to do. There's still a lot of controversy over what works, what doesn't work. And then I think some of the stuff he does is it's very hard to adhere to all of the stuff he does in terms of the weight training and all of the exercise. That's very difficult to do for a lot of people. So I don't know that everybody's going to adopt everything, but I think it is really promising stuff. And I think he's got very, very good ideas and deserves a lot more attention than he gets. And I think maybe research will catch up to that eventually.
Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah, I'm definitely a fan of the work that he does. All right, Anne wants to rehash history. Amesh, you said we needed shutdowns because we didn't test soon enough. But did you also think the emergency was winding down in February 2020?
Okay, I never said that we needed shutdowns. I said that shutdowns occurred because because hospitals got overwhelmed and there was no way to know who was sick and who wasn't, and governors panicked. I think if you can look at some of the talks I gave one at OCON in Austin where I go through this in great detail, but I never have thought shutdowns are necessary. I was advocating a Taiwan, South Korea approach from the very beginning. Test, trace, isolate. We didn't start we couldn't even test. South Korea was testing 10,000 people in March. We were testing like 200 in a week in the United States. So that's why the shutdowns occurred. I never was advocating shutdowns. I got in lots of trouble for some of the stuff I wrote at that time about shutdowns. So I think that that's a mischaracterization of my position. I understand why they occurred, but I never have advocated for them. And I never thought the emergency was winding down in February 2020. That was the first time I was on with you, Yaron, and I said, this is going to get bad. This is going to infect a lot of people. It wasn't going to wind down. I think we could have, if we would have been very prompt and aggressive in January and February and half of March and not wasted time with travel bans and putting people on Air Force bases and saying, the more we test, the worse we look, and blocking private companies from developing tests, we could have been Taiwan, but we weren't. And over 1 million Americans died because of that.
Yeah, you guys can check out the February 2020 interview that we did. It's amazing how many of Amesh's predictions during that show came true. The negative ones, where he was too optimistic, was on testing and stuff like that, which they never did. We were all hoping that they'd come around, that they'd actually execute on CDC protocols instead of what they actually did. But no, I don't remember anything about emergency winding down. I talked to Amesh in January and in January personally, and then February on the show. And at no point did he think this was going away. Let's see. Michael says, how does Canada get away with abolishing all forms of private for-profit coverage entirely? Even the UK doesn't do that.
So I think Canada is a complicated situation, and I have a lot of familiarity with it because I'm friends with a healthcare executive there. And I think, so if you look at Canada, as I said, doctors get paid about the same. Canada does liver transplants, bone marrow transplants. They're cutting edge doctors that work in Canada. But what I think so I think that they get away with it is because they ration the care, and it just takes a long time until you complain, and then it actually happens. So you do definitely hear horror stories about people that are in a queue for a very long time, but I don't know that that's the norm. I think most people, they get frustrated with it, they deal with it, but they muddle their way through it. And when there's true emergencies, what happens is people threaten to go to the US. That I've got an appointment in this hospital across Niagara Falls on the US side, and then all of a sudden things move fast in the Canadian system once you start threatening that you're going to go to the US. So then there is queue jumping. They don't all sit in the same line. There is some kind of triaging that's going on, but it's not good. And I think if they didn't live so close to the United States and have that ability, they might feel it. But they clearly clearly have a problem. But it's more about things that they don't consider emergency. So if you went there with a broken ankle, you'll get it. It would get taken care of just like in the U.S. Or you got on a liver transplant list, you get your liver transplant, it would probably be the exact same thing as you would get in the United States. But it's that, my knee hurts, I need an MRI for my knee, but I can walk and do things. Then that's going to be stuck in a line. So I think it's certain things that get put in that queue, but they don't have any way around it. Everybody is. They don't have any kind of private option at all. But as I said, many people, I think 85% of the Canadian population lives within driving distance of the US border, and many of them have health insurance in the US, or they get a cash discount. Remember, in the US, if you pay cash, you can get you can get an MRI and everything cheap if you bring money. So they do that too as well.
Yeah, my wife once asked an MRI place if she could pay cash, and they said, if you tell us you don't have insurance, then the rate is $300, something ridiculous. If you have insurance, the rate is double that. So it's absurd. But yes, let's see. Nascente asks, do you know if there are any organizations defending free choice in healthcare in Brazil?
No, I don't. I don't know really any organizations in Brazil. So I'm sorry.
Yes, I know some organizations in Brazil, but none specifically focused on healthcare. So
is this something that Malay will do in Argentina? I don't know I've not seen any of his health plans.
I haven't seen. It's a really good question. I mean, I think he would like to. It seems like that's something that he would need real legislation, probably not top of his list to do. He needs to get just the basic economy going, which is going to be enough work. But you'd think that he's a believer, whether he's actually going to prioritize it or not, I don't know. But that would be interesting. And I don't know what system they have there. I'm sure it's some form of socialized, but I don't know exactly how it works. Neo asked, Amos, do you know of Richard Hare and his work on IQ? Hare is H-A-I-E-R. If so, what do you think of the research? Also, do you know of any technology on the horizon that could increase intelligence?
I don't know that name. I don't know of any technology that will increase intelligence. I think maybe everybody will have AI assistants that kind of increase our intelligence or our working knowledge, but I don't know any specific research to do that. There probably are some things that happen in mice models, that mice can go through mazes faster if they do something, take some medicine, but I don't know any of that off the top of my head.
Yeah. Maybe Neuralink in the end.
Yeah.
But you're right. I mean, AI agents are going to increase our intelligence, right? A computer increases our intelligence. These tools make us much, much smarter than we are. Enric, thank you. Okay, Buzz has a whole series of questions. Okay. Why isn't there a common cold vaccine?
Because the common cold is caused by like dozens and dozens of different viruses, and those viruses mutate and change. So it's not something that's really attractive or easy for a pharmaceutical company to go after, because it may not even do that well. It'd be, people complain about the COVID vaccines not blocking infections. That would happen also with the common cold vaccine if you could, against one of about a dozen different viruses. That's why there's not one.
Why is health insurance so complicated?
I think we talked about that. That's the whole entire system is set up with all of these things trying to control costs and try to gain access, all these competing priorities. And it all evolved in this mongrel mixed economy system with everybody just trying to squeeze a little bit more of their survival out of it, including insurance companies. And insurance companies are completely regulated by slews and slews of regulation, even before Obamacare. And that's just that's just asking, like, why is like the SEC regulation so complicated? It's the exact same phenomenon.
I mean, another question that you could ask is, why is health insurance not insurance?
Yeah.
I mean, it's like, yes, it's complex, but it's not even insurance.
Yeah, there was an article in the Wall Street Journal, I think, a couple of days ago. There was an editorial, an article in the Wall Street Journal in the last 1 or 2 days with that exact title, like, saying that health insurance is not health insurance.
Yep. And it's all regulated. Every aspect of it is regulated. It's unbelievable. And indeed, states that regulate less, health insurance is a lot less complicated and a lot cheaper. But you can't buy insurance cross state. That's one of the challenges.
And then there's all these pharmacy insurance companies hire pharmacy benefit managers, and there's all of it. It's impossible to even keep up with, even if you're in the field.
Yeah. All right. Why don't we have a cure for cancer?
Cancer is not one thing. Cancer, there's multiple different types of cancer. Certain cancers are curable. Certain ones are not curable at this point. But I think so. It's people always think about cancer as just like one big thing, but it's not. There's so many different cancers. Even within like lung cancer, there's multiple different types of lung cancer. We do have cancer preventative vaccines, like the HPV vaccine that Yaron has talked about, that prevents cervical cancer, and that will probably get close to eradicating most types of cervical cancer. We've got a vaccine against hepatitis B, which prevents liver cancer. And there are cancers, certain leukemias, lymphomas. We've got these great technologies called CAR T therapies that are out there that are able to cure many cancers that were not uncurable. And we've got great immunotherapies, but there's still some cancers that have been very difficult for people to come up with a solution, or they get diagnosed too late, like ovarian cancer, pancreatic cancer, certain brain tumors. But I think we're getting there, and the technology is there, and it's moving in the right direction in a pace that I probably haven't seen in the last 20 years.
Yeah, I mean the HPV data is stunning. I mean the idea that HPV is a virus causing cancer was pretty revolutionary. I think the guy who came up with it was ridiculed for many years before he managed to prove that there was a cancer caused by a virus. And now that they're doing vaccines, the number of cases has just plummeted. It's not surprisingly, the new Health and Human Services Secretary, RFK, is anti the HPV vaccine.
Yeah, the more valuable, the more human beneficial the vaccine is, the more he's going to attack it, because I think of him as a nihilist, a destroyer. So he's not for health; he's anti-health, is how I think of him.
Yeah. Let's see. Boaz wants to know if you have any thoughts on fasting, cold plunges, saunas, and living until 150.
Just very general stuff. I think that there's some evidence that cold plunges boost immunity. I don't know how much it boosts longevity, but there's some studies that show that these things are that fasting, cold plunges may have some marginal benefit. I don't know how much that actually accrues to over time. I think this is an area where there's a lot of research, and you can probably find something that says the opposite of that. But I don't think there's anything wrong with cold plunging or fasting if you can tolerate it. It seems to have at least some data in animal studies, but I don't know that there's enough to say this is what everybody should be doing. But I don't really fault people for doing it, or think it could be somewhat promising. I don't know.
I just don't get it. Cold plunges is so painful. I don't get it. All right, Jacob, is the time to become a doctor variable by country? What about specialities? Does one country do medical training best?
I think it all depends on if you really like medicine, it's always a good time to be a doctor. I think if that's what you're really interested in, like the application of science to human problems right there and then, and you get to see it in front of your eyes, there's nothing else that does that other than medicine, I think. And so I think it all depends on what your personal values are and what you find interesting. And that's the same as specialties, that, traditionally medical students change their ideas for specialties multiple times. I didn't. I was always infectious disease. I really like infectious disease. But it all depends on what you like, what kind of lifestyle you want to have, what kind of problems you want to solve. And I think that the training, it depends. I think in the United States, you usually do 4 years of college, 4 years of medical school, and then residency. And in Europe, in the UK, for example, you just go directly into college, and it's 6 years, and then into residency training. But in places like the UK, because they have this socialized system, you can't just become like an attending physician. You have to have a spot in the NI. So you go through training, and you might be a junior doctor forever, not forever, but for like 6 or 7 years. So you come out of that and you're a wizard. Compared to someone who just in the United States, you just do 3 years of residency. And so if you look at someone I think that there's some pluses and minuses, but they're in training forever and they learn a lot of stuff, and they may be good at physical diagnosis because they have less technology. But I think that they're all very, very, very similar to the US model. The US and Canada are basically the same. Their training is identical. It's just that you're a little bit younger in the European places because you come out with 6 versus 8 years in the initial part of it. But anywhere you're seeing lots of patients and in like living in a hospital, like a residency, you're coming out of that pretty good, pretty tired, but good.
Yeah, is it difficult for somebody who's trained in Europe or somewhere overseas to practice medicine in the US?
Yeah, yes, it is. The only if in the United States, it depends on how much training you've had. If you just finished medical school in, then you can apply for a residency. It's if you've done your residency training in another country that they make you repeat it. Only the
Really?
US and Canada are equivalent. They don't make any. There's no discrimination. Either you can, if you did your training in Canada, it doesn't matter. That's fine. You can come to the US as if you were trained in the US and vice versa. But any other country, you have to redo your residency training. There's some efforts to try and reform that and find ways around that. That's happening because we have a major shortage of doctors, especially primary care doctors. But in general, yes, it's you're going to have to repeat. You're going to have to apply for residency and repeat. So you can, I remember being in residency, and there's people who are like neurosurgeons in other countries that are redoing like a 7-year neurosurgery residency because they want to work in the United States. So a lot of that is a little bit, it's all bureaucratic, and it's also it's the doctors in the United States that create those problems. They're the ones who make those regulations because they don't want the competition. So there is this guild mentality where we've got to keep people from other countries. We've got to make it hard for them so they don't come here and compete with us and drive down our salaries.
Yeah, whereas if you're an NHS doctor, you can move to Australia, New Zealand, South Africa. Yeah, it's a lot easier.
So within the British, what do you call it, crown system or whatever, the Commonwealth, within the Commonwealth. What about doctors who are experienced doctors 20 years in the field? Can they move to the US and pick up practice?
So they can. There's one trick you can do. So they would, to be a fully licensed independent doctor, they'd have to redo a residency.
Really?
But a big academic medical center can sponsor them. They can say, the state will say, you have a restricted license. You can be a doctor, but only at this hospital. So then you can end up becoming like an indentured servant to that hospital because that's your whole livelihood is tied to that. You can't move anywhere else because you don't want to do this residency. So that's one trick, is that like a very highly skilled transplant surgeon might come to Pittsburgh and they'll have a restricted license where they can only work at University of Pittsburgh, for example.
Wow.
Is it possible to do like 1 year fellowship if you've done residency somewhere else and then that can let you stay? Or
most states require 3 years of postgraduate training to get an unrestricted license. So you've got to do at least 3 years.
Yeah, I think my dad was a doctor, worked in the US, but it was always because he was sponsored by a major medical center. So he worked at, Mass General for a couple of years. He worked at NIH in Seattle, but it was always on a very short contract and sponsored by one entity. I don't think it was an unrestricted license. All right, let's see. Thoughts? This is for now the final question. What are your thoughts on medical tourism?
I think it's a good thing, but it's buyer beware, because we've seen some horrible things happen, for example, in Mexico, where there wasn't sterilization and people got really horrible fungal infections that were there. So medical tourism is in general good, but I think you really need to make sure that you're going to a place that has appropriate sterilization, infection control procedures. You've got to make sure that you've got your follow-up arranged, because some doctors may not want to touch you because you were taken care of by another doctor somewhere else. So make sure I would just look and see what you're getting into and look at the reviews, talk to people who have done it, meet the doctors. This isn't something you should do lightly. And as an infectious disease doctor, one of the biggest risks is not someone like dying on an operating table. It's the post-operative infections, because many places have drug-resistant bacteria. They may not have proper sterilization or infection control in the hospital. So someone might go there to get, breast implants and come back with a horrible, totally drug-resistant infection that causes sepsis because they got infected with something at the operative site. So just be really careful about what you do and make sure you read the reviews and talk to people before you do it.
Yeah. All right, Ray, why don't you tell us again how people can get involved and how they can get in touch with you guys, and if you've got anything coming up, anything exciting coming up.
Yeah, so in the show description, there's a link to our website. It's www.afcm.org. And you can contact me under people. My email is rschur@afcm.org. And yeah, we're working on different things. We had a conference in Austin a year and a half ago. We're working to maybe having another conference this year, but that's not final yet. And yeah, we're gonna start writing articles and be more active in the public domain.
Are there, I see you've got some recommended talks. Where can people find like talks on healthcare? If people are interested generally in the field of healthcare, where can they find talks from objectivists on the topic?
Our website is full of them, but I would highly recommend the talks we had a year and a half ago by Amish, by Don Watkins, by Greg Salmieri. It's under events on our website.
Okay, so it's all on the website.
We even have healthcare is not a right. That talk is up there too. So
Oh, that's right.
original-
Leonard Peikoff's Healthcare is Not a Rate is also that was in an AFCOM event, but in the 90s.
And you're on. We have 3 of your lectures there as well.
Yeah, I think I did some events. Those were fun.
And also John Lewis.
That's right. That's
Yep.
right.
So we have great material. It's we've rebooted the old website, so please take a look and yeah, get in touch.
Great. I am super excited that AFCOM is kind of back engaged and rebooted, and looking forward to the work that you're going to be doing, Ray. Always a pleasure, Amish, to have you on. We should talk sometime. I don't know. Is it worth talking about bird flu?
Well, it's always worth talking about bird flu.
Okay, so I'll have you back on to talk about
But I
bird
can
flu.
yeah,
I
we
think
can.
that would be fun. It's always good to talk about bird flu. Doesn't sound good, but yes, we'll have to do that. And yeah, all the best, guys, for 2025 at AFCOM, and I'll see you both in Florida in 10 days.
Thanks for having us.
All right,
Bye.
good night, everybody. I will see you guys not tomorrow because I'm in New York tomorrow, but I'll see you from New York on Wednesday. We will talk then. Bye, everybody. I'm going for a cold plunge in New York.